How a story begins in November of 2020. What a lot of people don't understand is that's actually when all of this started, when all the films technically started production, even though it's about a year before the first one. Let's go all the way to the beginning and talk about my experience with writer's anxiety. The reason why I mention it is because I wanted to be clear of how long this timeline actually is, but we're actually going to skip over to August of 2021. The original film, when we first started talking about wanting to make a film, actually started in November of 2020. However, COVID came in just before we were about to start filming, and filming only began just before we started college. And then that's when the first ever film started production. I'm going to go a lot into details in the future about this very film, but to keep it short, it was essentially a little horror film. It was going to be about 5 minutes long. Me and a group of friends decided, let's make a film with only 3 of us. So we went into a local forest and just started to film something. And we got 2 days into filming. We wanted to do a third day, but weather wasn't on our side. And then that was when the 72-hour film challenge became a thing. As a lot of you may know, the 72-hour film challenge is where What the Talk came from. So yes, the first ever film I ever released was never planned and wasn't technically ever supposed to exist. But here we are with a shitty film 72 hours later. Now, What the Talk was a bit of a failure. Like, it is absolutely god-awful. It has so many sound issues, character flaws, camera issues, so many things went wrong with the film. But honestly, I'm talking about writer's anxiety and what it is and stuff, but it never really got impacted by the release of this film. Yes, the film was piss poor, but any of the people that kind of complained about the film, I didn't really care about because it was almost like it was out of our control. We couldn't control whether or not this film was good because of how much went wrong with the project. So that didn't really start. But also, let me quickly define what writer's anxiety actually is because it's kind of my own made-up term. Writer's anxiety is not writer's block. Writer's block is where you can't come up with ideas. The thing that I'm going to talk a lot about and quite extensively throughout this video is this idea that I had ideas, but anxieties of myself, the way I viewed myself and the way I viewed the films, stopped me from making them. So it's anxiety of making films, essentially, rather than not having anything to make. Hopefully that makes it a bit more clear. But let's skip along to the Lost era and how that kind of impacted the timeline and my experience with it. Now, going into the Lost era, I was so excited. I wanted to make a film over Christmas, and I didn't have anyone to film with. So I thought, what if I made a film that embraced the fact that it was on its own, that I was the only one filming it? And then I brought in skinwalkers, getting lost in the forest, the handheld footage thing, the music, and then all of a sudden Lost was staring back at me and I knew I had to make the film. I was so excited, so pumped for this film to release. I made and released it in 5 days. As you could tell, writer's anxiety, not really a part of this, but I want to make the timeline as clear as possible. Don't worry, we'll get to the juicy stuff soon. But Lost was a massive success for me. It massively outdid What the Talk, was much more well regarded. Not to mention, some people even come to me today and say that Lost is their personal favourite, which I agree. Lost is my personal favourite of my catalogue so far as well. So yeah, Lost was a huge success and that was so exciting. So exciting that when I came up with a new script of a situation I was currently going through, I immediately announced it, posted the teaser trailer, and the film started production. That was It'll Be Okay. Now, this is where things started to go down the drain a little bit. I released the teaser trailer, but what you would know is if you were Eagle Eye viewers, you would know that I released the teaser trailer on January 8th. The film released on the 14th of April. Why did it take 4 months? Keep in mind, What Talk was made in 3 days. Lost was made in 5 days. This film took 4 months. What the fuck happened? And that was writer's anxiety. It'll Be Okay was the first script that I was quite personal with. I really wanted to push the fact that this is a real story and something that I took time to learn and develop with. And it was a mix of that and also the fact that I didn't really relate to the script. The script was far too dramatic for what it was. And I felt like it wasn't the right time for the film to be made, and so I didn't. Week after week, I kept saying, I'm going to start filming this film, I'm going to get cameraman, I'm going to make this film, and I never did. Over and over again, I kept putting off the film. It was so long of a process, and eventually I got sick of it. I actually got COVID, and then I decided, let's sit down and finish this script. And before I knew it, It'll Be Okay, the proper version, was then staring back at me and the film started production, which that came with its own set of obstacles. Throughout filming it, there'll be days where I decided not to film it. For example, scene 5 was actually filmed quite late. It was supposed to be in the middle of the script. I ended up making it just before the ending because it was a film it was a scene I had to do on my own. So I kept putting off and putting off because I was just really scared. I think the main reason why I was so scared was because It'll Be Okay was a much bigger film compared to Lost. Lost was a little solo project. If people didn't like it, fair enough. This was the first proper film with a proper story, a proper narrative, and a bit of a visual style going on. If it failed, it had no excuses, and I think that's what I was scared of. I couldn't hide behind any excuses, and it terrified me. But through the days where I did film with people, I kind of made the schedule and I was like, I can't cancel now, I just have to do it. And so eventually the film was done. Luckily, It'll Be Okay came out the way exactly how I wanted it to, and when it released, it was the biggest film I ever made. For the longest time, It'll Be Okay was seen as the magnum opus, that this is the highest regarded film, and people were genuinely excited to see what Short Film 4 was, and so was I. I was so pumped and excited from It'll Be Okay's release that I actually started to write the next film immediately after, which you would know is the infamous Cuts and Bruises script that went into production, started filming, and then I cancelled. Now, here's where Rise comes into it even more. Yeah, I told you, I got impacted by it a lot in the early years, especially in the kind of middle ground between the first ever films, the last set of films, and how I am now. So, yeah, let's get into it. The cancelled Cuts and Bruises script and why I got rid of it. Firstly, there are many reasons to why I cancelled the script, but the main one was how much pressure it was that I put on myself. I just released the biggest film I thought I was ever going to make, something that was emotional, something that was dramatic, had some really great music, some really great segments. What the hell can I do to make after that then lives up to this big, high regard thing? And the truth is, I didn't know. Cuts and Bruises was supposed to be film 4. It's because this was an action film, and I thought because it's actiony, it stands away from It'll Be Okay, so it wouldn't be that bad that people look down on it, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Excuse after excuse after excuse. It started to get to the point where I was making this film and all the other ones that were considered for Short Film 4 based on It'll Be Okay. It was like I was picking certain scripts, making films certain ways, just so then they are different enough to then not be seen as inferior. That was the goal with those films. Not be seen as inferior. And that doesn't make a good film. Just because a film is trying not to be as bad as its predecessor doesn't mean it's going to make it good. And that's probably why deep down my gut wouldn't let me make these films, because they weren't made from the right moments. They weren't scripts that needed to be made. They weren't scripts that had stories to tell. They were simply scripts that covered up my insecurities, that covered up the fact that I didn't know what I was doing. After a few weeks of this building in me and trying to make the film and filming days not working, I decided to cancel the script. I saw it as too inferior, it wasn't big enough, it didn't work enough, and so I decided not to make it. And this was the first ever film that started a production and then got cancelled during it. Luckily, nothing was ever announced, I managed to keep that up, but in terms of getting a cast and getting on set and starting to film a film, it is the first ever one and only ever one to start production and then get cancelled. Luckily, I decided to rewrite the script around Alone's era, which, don't worry, I'll get into that part of the timeline soon, but it's looking a lot more promising now, but we'll talk about that later. And then, do you remember that scene, scene 6, One Hit Wonder, and how I mentioned all of those scripts? 95% of them was supposed to be made in this time period between It'll Be Okay and Wildlife, because it was a 6-month period where nothing was being made because I kept putting a film in production and didn't want to make it because they didn't work. They weren't made from a place of passion. They weren't a script that I connected with. They were just scripts that were building up a library and were designed to be inferior enough that you wouldn't look down on it and It'll Be Okay, but also not too big that all of a sudden it had the pressure of living up to it. It was a really weird headspace, and it's so hard to describe, but ultimately it is what held most of the films back. And yeah, the timeline doesn't stop here. Let's skip a couple months, like obviously this was going on for many, many months, but let's cut around to August of 2022 when Wildlife started production. Now, as a lot of you may know, Wildlife was supposed to be part of a trilogy because, yet again, in my fucked up head, I thought, what was one way of living up to It'll Be Okay? What if I make 3 individual films that are all shorter and have their own story, but combined together will then be seen as just as good as It'll Be Okay? Bang, I had my idea. This then lets me make 3 films instead of 1. And Wildlife was originally going to be short film 4 on its own. It was going to be a solo film. It was going to be completely by itself. It was going to be around about 24 to 30 minutes. That would have Sam go into back into London and stuff like that, campfire scenes at night, all kinds of cool scenes. But yeah, I decided to make a shortened version for the Horizon trilogy, which if you watch the behind the scenes, you would know the Horizon trilogy. The Horizon trilogy was going to be Wildlife, Ruin, and Flowers. Ruin and Flowers never happened because of Riot's anxiety. Let's get into it. Firstly, Wildlife was already made at a very challenging time for me. All the time that Alone was talking about, that time period that it was written about, it was this exact period. It was midway through it, so mentally I was not doing okay. And so Wildlife actually only took one day. So we did the filming day of Wildlife. I didn't really connect with the film that much. I didn't really want to make the Horizon trilogy. And that's when Wildlife basically took a backseat. I basically refused to edit it, which wasn't really fair on the film and also the cast that spent so much time coming out to make it. This was then I started to gain a little bit of inspiration from when I first made the film, and I was like, I want to make short film 4, I need to make it. It just doesn't feel right that it's been so long. We've got a full film made, a film that I do enjoy. I thoroughly do enjoy Wildlife, and I actually consider it the most underrated of my catalogue. But I needed to make it. I couldn't stop holding it back, even though I was so terrified of releasing a 10-minute long film that went out on its own after I built up short film 4. I just had to swallow my demons and just make the damn thing. It ended up being 17 minutes, so it doesn't really get looked down upon that much. But yeah, Wildlife became short film 4. And then something happened that kind of changed everything. So we're going to talk about two things. Firstly, the smaller one, which was that Wildlife underperformed severely. In fact, it is still the least popular film. And while I don't mind, I like to make films for story, narrative. If they don't do well, they don't do well. And I always said that Wildlife was never expected to do that well. But I guess in the background of my head, where I was thinking I need to make a bigger film, that did kind of run circles on me. But the main thing is about what I'm going to talk about. There was an incident that happened in a group chat just after Wildlife, and this was whilst filming In the Shadows. In the Shadows was basically pretty much done, ready to go, because as you know, they were filmed and made pretty much at the same time. Wildlife had just released. Then a group chat of people started to take the piss out of me. And I was thinking about exposing them, but I'm going to be a decent person and I can't be asked to get into drama. So I'm just going to say that they started to take the piss out of me. Not my films, but me as a person, and how shitty they were, and that really, really got to me. A few days later, I was on a call with a friend, and then we realised that people who were part of this discussion that I literally saw myself could for some reason see. So, for example, on Instagram, if I released 3 stories, they would be able to see 2 and 3, which then we realised they were sharing it into a group chat that they had. And from how they reacted before, I definitely didn't think they were saying the nicest things. This kind of destroyed me mentally. I was on the brink of not releasing In the Shadows because I didn't know what they would think. For some reason, I cared so much about their opinion. I cared so much about what people thought that In the Shadows almost didn't release. I was terrified to make a teaser trailer of it. When I was making it, doing that little clip where I'm walking through the garden, it's just a little teaser thing to announce In the Shadows is next. The entire time what was running through my head is, what will they think? They're going to think this is cheap. They're going to think this is shit. They're just going to send this to that group chat. They're going to make fun of me. And even when I released the film and it was doing well, I was like, thank God that people are loving the film. It's such a good film. I really enjoy it. But I still couldn't get it off my mind that they were sharing this film around. And it ran circles with me. That no matter what I would do or what I would make, it would just be sent around and people would be making fun of me but from the back of my mind. And whilst a lot of people be like, well, that doesn't matter to you. Why should that matter? And you're right. To other filmmakers who are watching this, don't worry about what people are saying about you. It doesn't matter. You make what you want to make. The thing that impacted me the most was the fact that, to me, it was easier to give up and stop making films, to stop giving them things that they can make fun of me for, and to just kind of sit quietly and not really make any films. And that worked for a couple months, but it really got to me because I'm a really creative person, I guess. I love these films. These films are everything to me. And stop making them because of what I was terrified other people would say really hurt me. And it also made me start to resent those films as well, because I just saw them as outlets that people could bully me for. And then that's when the Alone script came into the picture. This is where I'm going to answer the question in the title. Why Alone took so long? Because of Riot's anxiety? Because of what they caused? A little bit before this happened is when Alone was essentially done. The script was ready to go. But then what absolutely destroyed me was this moment, and how I realized that if I make Alone, they're going to make one of my films, whatever, but it's the fact that Alone is such a personal story. Alone is a recreation of my life during the hardest times. It is a retelling of other people's hardest times, given those parts of the film wasn't in there yet. But as the film started to develop, as I was adding in other people's stories, and it got more and more emotional, deeper, and how it was a really gut-wrenching true story about depression, I was like, I can't do it. I can't let people see this and make fun of me because I'm not ready yet. Around that time, these things were so recent to me. I was still learning and growing and developing from it, that if people made fun of it, it would have brought me right back to square one. I couldn't handle people knowing these things and making fun of my life. And so Alone sat on the shelf for 10 months. Every single film sat on the shelf for 10 months. I made a whole new filming schedule after In the Shadows of smaller films that I were going to release leading up to these big, massive films. But because I was so terrified of what people would say about these films, I refused. I'd rather sit there in silence than let people make fun of me for the things that I love. It destroyed me for so many months. And that is why Alone took so long, because I didn't want people to judge my life in the most vulnerable state. So now the question is, what changed? And that is, I simply had to grow up. With the second year of college, losing so many close people to me, I had to grow up in a very short period of time. This took months of growing, learning, seeing the kind of person I wanted to be, seeing the kind of things I wanted the films to be. I was making major production after major production, which was so helpful to me, which is why I still respect my college so much. Doing Little Mermaid, Midsummer Night's Dream, and Wojciech was such massively defining moments to me. There were moments that said, I can do this. I can still carry on, because each and every single one of them made me explore things I was uncomfortable to explore, made me explore things I've never done before. And doing Wojciech, being the main character on that stage and proving that I could do it by myself, gave me the confidence to realize I can take this now. I'm at a point where I have learned so much and I'm ready for the next chapter of my life. I'm ready for uni, except there's one thing still lingering, and that was Alone's script. The period of time that Alone was made. The one way to move on from it was to make that script, release it, and finally take the possible hate that could come to me. And so Alone started production. For the most part, writer's anxiety has mainly changed, but I do want to talk about something, which is something, I'm going to talk about two things specifically, which is one, when I started Alone's production, something in me changed. Alone for the longest time was going to be the final film. I was going to end it there and that'll be it. But while I'm writing Alone, all of a sudden new scripts were being made. I dealt with a heartbreak just before Alone happened, and all of a sudden a new script was staring back at me. Not about that film, not about that situation specifically, but all of a sudden an emotional scene, emotional films, things that I really cared about started to appear from events that weren't correlated. All of a sudden scrap scripts were all of a sudden talking to me. I could all of a sudden make these scenes that were so emotional, so important to me. I was excited. I was excited to make a film, which, keep in mind, I have not been excited to make a film since Lost. And now I was excited to make another film after the final film. What was going on? For now, I'll leave that there. There is an announcement coming very soon where I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But things in me were starting to change. All of a sudden, I was so proud of Alone, so proud of getting through that time, that it changed something in me that I wanted to make more films. And when I released Alone, writing anxiety was there. I was terrified of how it would be received. But then one thing that I think finally cleared the air for me and made me more excited than ever to make films again is the fact that people loved it. People adore Alone. It is seen as the brand new magnum opus. I finally proved to myself that I could outdo what came before. I can make films, scenes, messages, lessons that can outdo what came before. Yes, they may be smaller in size. I don't think I'm going to make a film as big as Alone ever. But my God, that doesn't mean that these stories can't be told. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden, because Alone is there, everything else is inferior. I've learnt a new way of filmmaking, and I can thank all that to Alone and the people who loved it, to which I gotta say thank you so much. If it wasn't for people adoring Alone as much as I do, as much as this story means to me, I don't think I would still be making this video. I think I would have just released the film and left it at that. In fact, right as I came back for a little bit when I did the Alone behind the scenes, why this video and the other video took so long is because I was scared to be open. But now I'm at a state now where I'm ready to start the next chapter in my life, and Alone is a big part of that, and leaving writing's anxiety will never go away, but it's something that has been so much more manageable. And this is the next thing that I wanted to say to other fellow filmmakers who feel like they could be struggling with writer's anxiety. And this is the brutal truth I had to accept myself, which is the reason why I was filled so much with anxiety is because deep down I did not like the person that I was. I was so terrified of people critiquing me because I could barely like myself. People critiquing me would point out these flaws that I was trying to avoid so badly. I wasn't happy with who I was as a person, and making Alone, reliving that trauma and forcing to learn from it, all of a sudden started to grow me into a new person, and a person that I could love and appreciate. So then when the writer's anxiety that should have popped in, that should have made me terrified to finally release the film, it didn't happen. Because I finally accepted things for the way that they were. I finally grew and accepted myself and started to love myself and what I could bring to the table. I stopped thinking about my flaws. Instead, I looked at my flaws and said, how can we change this? How can we fix this? Why is this a flaw? And what can I do to make it no longer a flaw? And that's where we are today, where I've learned so much more about myself and through things. And now that and you can never get over writer's anxiety. I don't think it's something that's ever going to go away. But now that it's more manageable, now that it doesn't define me as much, I feel like I can finally sit down and talk about it. Because another thing that came with writer's anxiety was the fact that I didn't want to tell people that I was struggling with specifically writer's anxiety. Like, I'm all of a sudden struggling so badly mentally because of something I'm technically putting on myself because I'm the one making these films. You know, it's to me, it sounded so stupid, which is why I want to make this video, to make it more aware that filmmakers struggle with themselves more than other people. Most of the time, we don't struggle with criticism. We struggle with ourselves and how it points out what we fear. And if you are someone who is struggling with writer's anxiety, then I think you know what steps to take. I can't sit here and tell you the answer, but I can tell you that there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. Look back and see what you need to do. Myself personally, my resolution was making a script about the times that I hated so much and then having to relive it and make it. That forced me to reflect and finally accept myself for who I am. And the same could happen for you. Maybe it might not. But at the end of the day, we're all in this thing for a reason. We're making these films for a reason. So if you're a filmmaker out there and you're struggling, good luck, because you definitely got this. And to everyone else, thank you so much for supporting all the films. Big things are coming, and I'm so excited to discuss more. But as of right now, that is the end of the video. I hope you did enjoy. Make sure to leave a like, comment, all that good stuff. If you want to go check out the films, there'll be a link down below. But other than that, that's the end of the video. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you guys next time. Farewell.